This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny, and today on the download, the main thing that we are looking at is the imminent Russian invasion of the Ukraine. There has, over the weekend, been a significant shift in the attitude of the Russian government on their actions being taken in Ukraine, with a notification that they will be moving into areas deemed to have high terrorist activity. Now, it's neither here nor there on taking a opinion on the actions of this, but we're simply looking at as its effect on the markets and what we can expect. Already this morning, we are seeing, as of Tuesday of the recording of this, we are seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500, and the NASDAQ all trending down a bit. All about 0.5% or a couple hundred points on each one of those indexes. The things that are looking up presently are things like gold, silver, and crude oil. Crude oil trading up at roughly 3.1% as of, again, the recording of this. Some definite things to look at. JP Morgan saying that the biggest threat for stock investors is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Again, things like oil trending up, although the area that this conflict is taking part in is heavy in natural resources. So it will be interesting to see how these things actually turn out. Some other non-Russian and Ukraine-related news that the large investor Carl Icahn has taken a stance on trying to acquire 2 board seat changes within the company of McDonald's due to their treatment of livestock, mainly pigs. So that's kind of a very interesting shift that we're seeing there on the commodities markets. Just on an interesting note that a single investor would be jockeying for 2 board seat changes, such a large company. Home Depot stock is rising after a great profit and sales report indicating that they beat all of their expectation, and their dividend rising by 15%. However, the shares are trading a bit down 0.3% as of this morning. A few other things that we are looking at in COVID-related news. The FDA is reportedly approving a second COVID booster shot. So right now we have approval for the first booster shot from companies such as Pfizer and Moderna, but we are also looking for them to approve, fully approve, not just the emergency use authorization that was given previously to the shots, for a second one going into people. The kind of last thing that we are looking at is the merger between Microsoft and Activision, the merger taking significantly more time than was initially previously thought. The actual integration of both companies being a significantly harder task than most people had anticipated, causing shares of Microsoft to stagnate a little bit, which was what was once thought to be a significant boost to the tech giant share value. The merger difficulties starting to weigh in on a little bit of that, as trading has remained relatively flat for Microsoft shares after the initial acquisition of Activision. This has been the download. Today on the What is Form 1040? Most of us always around tax filing season hear people talk about 1040s and tax returns and all this kind of stuff. But what exactly does it mean when people start spouting off tax form number identifications? Well, Form 1040 is the most common one that almost every single U.S. taxpayer will have to file. Form 1040 is the standard internal revenue service form that individual taxpayers use to file their annual income tax returns. The form contains sections that require taxpayers to disclose their taxable income for the year to determine whether additional taxes are owed or whether the filer will receive a tax refund. Form 1040 is always filed by individual taxpayers, and personal information such as name, address, social security number, and the number of dependents are asked for on Form 1040. This has been The What Is. Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Today on the podcast, we don't have a guest, but we are going to be looking at something that is increasing in popularity with the current climate of high inflation and rising consumer pricing index, and that is investing with precious metals with an IRA. We also have some current tax court cases that bring to light some best practices that really need to be followed by people that are looking to invest in precious metals. So we're going to get into some of the basics about how exactly you invest with precious metals with an IRA and some things to be really careful about when doing so, as the burden when it comes to compliance is shifted a little bit when it comes to investing with precious metals into several different types of structures. So in general, let's start off with what exactly this means to invest in precious metals with an IRA. Well, to start with that, let's understand the basics of alternative investing with IRAs. The IRS does not delineate exactly what you can specifically invest in with an IRA. They leave it up to the custodian in large part to determine what they will or won't hold. There are certain things that you cannot purchase with an IRA, very specifically, naming directly purchasing a life insurance policy, or if you actually go out and buy something that is collectible. Now, in the context of investing with precious metals with an IRA, that can kind of get brought up specifically because certain gold, silver, and precious metal coins can be traded on their value as collectibles and not necessarily on their bullion content. Now, it's important to understand that although you can certainly buy gold coins and precious metal coins with an IRA, you have to make sure that they are strictly traded on their bullion content value and not something other than that, such as, their rarity or scarcity in a certain collectibles market. Now, with that said, if you're looking to buy coins, typically we look to most of all of the large governmental organizations such as the United States, Canada, Mexico, China, Australia. They have national mints that make standard gold, silver, platinum, and palladium coins, and these can certainly be purchased by the IRA. Now, the IRS does indicate minimum fineness requirements because you don't necessarily always look to buying coins. So they set a minimum standard of fineness, meaning that the purity of the precious metals must meet a minimum requirement. And typically that's always going to be 0.995 or 0.9995 for precious metals. So most people just err on the side of buying government issued bullion standards, and that typically keeps them in the clear when it comes to investing in precious metals. Now, there's some procedural aspects that we'll get into in a minute, but looking at it from the perspective of just starting out, if you're looking to invest in precious metals with an IRA, first you need to open up an account with a custodian that will be willing to hold those types of metals, because taking a distribution from a retirement plan would incur taxes and potentially penalties if you just went and took the money out and then simply invested it into precious metals. So if you want to invest in precious metals with an IRA, the route that most people would take is that you actually open an IRA at a custodian like Advanta, and then direct Advanta to interface with a particular broker. Let's say you have a local gold and coin dealer that you would like to purchase the metals from. You could certainly negotiate a deal with them, have the invoice provided to Advanta, and then we would ultimately fund that purchase. Now, you would need to negotiate any type of pricing, whether there's a lock on a particular type of spot price or what have you. But ultimately, the negotiation of any type of pricing and other types of aspects with regard to the purchase all have to be negotiated by the client. At that point, we would ensure that any type of purchasing invoices are correctly titled in the name of the IRA, And then ultimately we would fund that purchase with the IRA directly. Now, from there, the client is directly prohibited from taking physical possession of the actual metals as they are held by the IRA and would need to select a safekeeping and storage facility to actually hold these precious metals. Now, typically, most clients would use someone like a market safekeeping storage facility, places like Delaware Depository, also doing business as Fidela Trade. There's a lot of different places that will offer these services, but essentially the IRA is opening up a, easy way to think about it would be kind of like a safe deposit box at this particular storage facility. And then the coins or the bullion would be shipped directly to that facility and then held in the name of the IRA. This would be done in perpetuity until the client actually wanted to take possession of the actual metals, in which case then we could have it shipped directly to them, and then they would take possession of the metals, and then they would also be issued a 1099 showing a taxable distribution in the amount of the spot price at the date that the metals were actually shipped to the client. Now, this brings up kind of an interesting aspect about precious metals. Precious metals are what are called a bearer instrument, meaning that whoever essentially holds that physical item in their hand really is the owner of that particular item. So there's really nothing to say that anyone other than the person who has the coin in their hand owns it. Now, this differs greatly from things like real estate or promissory notes or really any other kind of asset, because even if I were to go and step onto a piece of real estate that my IRA owned, the IRA still owns it in the public record. Even if I were to sit on the front lawn, I'm not necessarily taking possession of it. I haven't taken a distribution of it. Granted, you really shouldn't be going and sitting and looking at directly your IRA owned property, with the exception of just making sure maybe some work was done. You can't, utilize it or take a benefit from it. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is that just by, touching a tangible piece of indicia or the actual investment of most types of investments, you're not actually changing the ownership of it. However, with a bearer instrument, meaning that the person that actually holds it or has physical possession of it is the actual, for lack of a better term, owner of it, you do run into an issue with precious metals. Now, this is kind of going to segue into another portion of the topic that I'm covering, is that you need to be very careful about physically taking possession of any type of precious metals that are held by the IRA. And this is why we have to structure it when a client wants to invest in precious metals with an IRA, that a third-party safekeeping storage facility must be used. We do not physically store and safekeep metals here at Advanta. Obviously, there's a litany of reasons why we don't do that, namely for security reasons and insurance purposes. We're not going to hold something, that valuable on premise. We farm that work out to people that are much better suited and much more secure than, our physical location to actually do the storage of metals. Now, some brokers do offer vault security services for precious metal clients. So you don't always necessarily need to go out and find a brand new facility to store your metals. Sometimes the actual dealer will provide vault services for you, and that's certainly fine. Now, we at Advanta only allow for specifically 9 different safekeeping storage facilities. So if a client wanted to use a different facility, they might need to change the structure of how their IRA invested in the metals, because we do restrict clients to one of the 9 that we work with simply for administrative overhead. It's just not feasible for us to offer clients the ability to use anyone they'd like. So we have a working relationship with several storage facilities, and clients that don't want to use any other type of ancillary entity to invest in the metals can use one of those 9. Now, if a client wants to have a little bit of tighter control of their IRA owned assets, they might elect to structure their IRA a little bit differently. Now, as I mentioned initially, clients, when they typically want to buy precious metals, they'll open an account with us. They'll find a brokerage they'd like to purchase the metals from, and then they will direct us to fund that purchase from the broker, and then the broker will ship the metals to a safekeeping storage facility. Now, this is the way that it's normally done. The safekeeping storage facility, separate from the client, holds them in a vault. The client has no access to it. It's secure. And then if they ever wanted to take physical possession of the metals, it would then be shipped to them and a distribution would be issued. Now, The other way that sometimes clients elect to structure their IRA accounts is that they will have some type of secondary entity, sometimes an LLC, sometimes a trust, that the IRA will be invested into as the sole beneficiary or the sole member of those of that particular entity. Now, most people like to refer to this as checkbook control. So if you ever are doing some more research on this and you find something that you say, hey, I'd like to invest in checkbook control, that's what most people are talking about, is when their IRA invests into a separate entity that they in turn have access or control to invest their monies as they seem fit. Now, it's important to note that if you do go with checkbook control, there is a higher degree of responsibility that's placed on you as the client to make sure that everything is being done in accordance with IRS rules and regulations, meaning that you aren't violating any type of IRS rule with regard to prohibited transactions, making sure that you're buying everything and storing and record keeping everything correctly. Because when you do this, instead of Advanta or the custodian having direct access and reviewing everything that you're doing, you as the manager or the trustee of the trust would be the one that's actually processing any investments, record keeping any transactions, and performing all of the administrative duties of the IRA, otherwise done by the IRA custodian when not using checkbook control. The reason I bring this up is that recently there was a tax court case, which was McNulty versus the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, that dealt with IRA clients that had an LLC committing a prohibited transaction by taking physical possession of their precious metal assets. Essentially, what happened is that the individual McNulty had invested their IRA into the sole membership of an LLC, and then that LLC purchased American Eagle coins, but they took physical possession of those coins. So the client, acting as the IRA manager, went and purchased American Eagle coins, which again, that type of coin is allowed to be purchased by the IRA. And then they had the coin shipped directly to them for safekeeping and storage. Now, the IRS took umbrage with this, and we also guide our clients in a similar fashion that if you're going to be using an IRA-owned LLC, that you should always be using a safekeeping storage facility separate from yourself, because with gold being a bearer instrument, meaning that whenever you take possession of it, even if you're acting as the manager of an LLC, there's really no way to differentiate your actions as the manager of an LLC versus you personally, because there is no like recorded deed to a gold coin. There's nothing else that would indicate that you holding that gold coin is anything other than you personally. So the IRS deemed that this indeed was a disqualifying action and a improper distribution, and there was significant consequences for the actual IRA holder. That in order to purchase these types of metals, you really need to be using a third-party safekeeping storage facility in order to properly hold IRA-owned metals. The last thing you as a client want to do is invest in something that is typically seen as a hedge against inflation or other markers, and then just to turn around and be slapped with prohibited transaction penalties and possibly having your IRA completely blown up, for lack of a better term, and distributed to you along with taxes and penalties associated for that. It's important to remember, though, that although we do allow for clients to utilize checkbook control for their IRAs, it is of paramount importance that if you're going to invest in something like precious metals, that you absolutely make sure that you abide by any and all IRS regulations. And the biggest thing you can do, and one of the easiest rules to stay on the right side of, is personal utilization and benefit from your IRA-owned assets. Although we do understand that clients sometimes want to have slightly tighter control with checkbook control, being able to write checks, being able to sign contracts and things like that. If you're going to be dealing with something that doesn't have any type of particular recorded ownership of it, things like precious metals, cryptocurrency, things like that, that you really need to make sure that you are always going to segregate yourself and keep yourself one step removed from the actual physical receipt of those types of assets. It just goes to illustrate that although the clients in this case with McNulty versus Commissioner weren't necessarily investing in something prohibited, the way in which they did it ultimately caused them issues. And I would always highly encourage clients, even if you are investing in things that we do allow here at Advanta, but maybe you're doing it through checkbook control. If you have a question, give us a call. We are always happy to help and, kind of walk you through what might be some of the issues with a particular type of investment. The last thing you want to do is, kind of go on what an assumption would be and then potentially have huge tax and penalty issues with the IRS later on down the road. So again, if you'd like to invest in precious metals, you are certainly able to do so. The types of precious metals you can invest in are things like gold, platinum, silver, and palladium. So there's 4 different options you have. You can buy them from many local gold dealers. The governments of a lot of nations around the world also issue standard coins with a high purity content that your IRA could invest into. And if that's something you'd like to do, we're certainly able to help you out with it. It's just important to remember that when you do things like this, you need to really ensure that everything is being done in accordance with IRS rules and regulations. And if you have any questions on stuff like that, we're always here to help. It's certainly something that is outside the realm of what most people are used to looking at with IRAs. So again, if that's something that is of interest to you, I'd always recommend giving a qualified, IRA custodian or someone that is a little bit of a subject matter expert in the field a call and let us walk you through the actual steps of how to do this kind of stuff correctly. Because the last thing that you want to do is run afoul of the IRS and their regulations. Definitely not a fun group of people to be on the wrong side of. So this has been our edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Just wanted to bring something up to y'all that you may not have understood that you could do, and also some potential issues that have come up recently with people investing in these types of assets as they are becoming much more popular with the rising inflation and other issues going on in the world. Precious metals typically always get pretty popular around that point. So if you have any other questions, I would always encourage you to reach out to us. We're certainly always able and happy to help you with your questions on precious metals and IRAs. This has been the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.